Feet, wandering feet, feet, wandering feet, feet, wandering feet. They wander away from me. They wander away from me. From me. From me. From me. My name is Noah. I'm a mastering engineer. I'm also a musician.
From my understanding, this is the best studio in Toronto to master your record. Is this correct?
I would say it's the best in Toronto. There are some other good studios in Toronto, but certainly not with the pedigree that Lacquer Channel has had. We've been around for over 35 years. Some of the best albums, arguably, in the history of Canadian music have been mastered at Lacquer Channel. Some of the classic albums have been like Rush and Triumph and U2 and a Peter Gabriel album, Tragically Hip albums, and Broken Social Scene albums, and like a Blue Rodeo album, and Hoxie Workman and Sarah Celine. And
Cool. So what are some of the ones that you've actually mastered yourself from those?
I've done all the Broken Social Scene albums. I've done Howie Beck and Hayden, and I've done a band called the National, and just hundreds. It's hard to recall, but
And you did a few of my albums, right?
oh yeah, probably the most important albums I've ever done.
Of course.
The EMAR album.
You mastered all of these 3 albums. So this is my best album that you've done.
Mastering is the final stage of the recording process. A band records, then mixes, then they have to master. And recording is more the individual instruments putting down onto tracks, and mixing is taking the individual tracks and putting them down, usually to a left and right stereo. And then mastering is taking the individual songs and making them into an album that sounds coherent and feels right.
So what would you say to an independent artist? I know that I've myself have been in this situation where I considered cutting costs and not mastering my album.
Cheap mastering is probably not as good as not mastering at all. Mastering is one of those things that you really have to experience good mastering to know how important it is. And definitely somebody with experience and good equipment in a great room. The room's probably the most important part of mastering. Makes all the difference to an album feeling good and sounding good, because music, as we know, is much more about than just about how it sounds, but how it makes you feel. And a poorly mastered album can make an album unlistenable in a feel kind of way. It could leave people sort of uneasy and uncomfortable with it.
So you would recommend definitely mastering your album?
I think it's absolutely essential to master. I think it's as important part of the recording process as any of the other two. One of the objectives of mastering is to make it sound good on any system you're running, like whether it's an iPod or a home stereo or even on a television, and is also keeping in mind how albums sound on radio. Radio is not as much of a factor as it used to be. However, people are still getting played on radio, and more importantly now is MP3 delivery, and how your album will translate onto MP3 is an extremely important process right now. WAV files or AIF files, or it really doesn't matter. And sometimes people bring tape. We have a tape machine over here, and sometimes people bring CD audio. Sometimes people bring files. Files are definitely the most common these days. So just whatever you record it at is what people should bring.
So you don't actually physically have to meet the artist to master their album. They can just send it to you digitally, right?
I'd say about 50% of what I do, they don't come in. They're local or they want to fly in. It's a good environment to be in here. The room's set up for people to be in here. Probably pretty essential that you master with me if you really want a decent sounding album. Really.
I agree with that. Definitely. You want to hire Noah Mintz at Lacquer Channel. He's your man.
Actually, any of us here are very good, and I guess you said we're probably one of the best in Canada.
So who are the other mastering guys who work here?
Phil Dimitro is one of the other guys, and George Graves is our senior mastering engineer with about 40 years experience. Only studio in Canada with an actual chief mastering engineer, with someone at least with that level of experience. Really, depending on the album, it's between $100 and to $150 per track, and generally about between $1,000 to $1,500 an album. Certain factors determine that cost, like how long it's going to take, and the artist budget, and how many songs they have. I'm going to give a quick rundown of the gear I use for mastering. Right here, you may follow my finger here. This is a Chandler Limited Neve style compressor. This is a Neve EQ. It's a stereo mastering EQ. Only about like 30 or 40 were ever made. They're very, very rare and very amazing. This is the holy grail of mastering EQs. This is a Soundtech mastering EQ. This is, I guess, the sister EQ to that EQ. It's the GML 9500 mastering EQ. This EQ is worth about 15,000 Canadian, whereas this one's more. The Soundtech is more, since it's vintage and old. It's kind of rare, so it's very difficult to price. But it's in the tens of at least 10,000 or so. It's a DCS AD converter. This is one of the best AD converters in the world. This is the Dangerous Master. It's a transfer console. It lets me put gear in and out. This is a Neumann console EQ. It's a very small format vintage equalizer. This is the Crookwood mastering console. It allows me to route what I hear and how I hear it, and gear in and out, and all sorts of cool things. This is a Manley tube compressor. This is a SPL passive equalizer. You have 3 sets of cuts and 3 sets of boosts, and it's all passive. This is a custom design Muth Audio Engineering Baxendale EQ. Basically, you have the low frequencies and the high frequencies, and then a low frequency boost and a high frequency boost. This is the Dolby Spectral Processor 740. It's a dynamic EQ with a very, very special process. Really, really neat. This is the Maslek peak and high frequency limiter. This is right here. You get a little bit of a peak limiter, and then you get a high frequency limiter at the end here. And this is the Weiss DS1 Mark II. It's a compressor and de-esser. Very expensive and very amazing sounding. And then you can look at our speakers over there. Those are the Kranis speakers, custom designed for the studio, and they sound really good and really natural. The Ampex half-inch machine, tape machine, and we can go over here. We can look at the Studer. It's a 1/4 inch and half-inch playback machine only. It's specific for lathe cutting, lacquer cutting. Over here is this is a Doug Sachs Design Mastering Lab Phono preamp, and this is a bunch of cool stuff that doesn't do anything at all.
It was late September, I think I can remember. It was about 20 degrees, and you were looking at me while sucking down a Pepsi. Your hair was blowing in the breeze. Yeah, we skipped the day of classes, sitting on our asses, watching Simpsons on the VCR.
Check out the studio online at lacquerchannel.com. That's LACQUER channel.com.
Who is laughing? Who